The Alexandria Hotel coughed me up into another Tuesday, or maybe it was Wednesday. The heat in my office was a thick yellow thing you could cut with a dull knife, and it lay heavy on the city like a greasy thumbprint on a cheap photograph. My head throbbed, a dull, persistent drum beat behind my eyes, playing the rhythm section for a hangover that had overstayed its welcome by a good 12 hours. Last night's bourbon, usually a reliable friend, had turned mean in the small hours, leaving behind a taste in my mouth like old pennies and regret. I was avoiding work, which wasn't hard since work seemed just as intent at avoiding me. The office was a shoebox with a desk, two chairs that had seen better decades, and a filing cabinet stuffed with the ghosts of other people's bad decisions. The air tasted of dead cigarettes and promises I hadn't kept, even to myself. Outside the grimy window, Los Angeles shimmered, a cheap mirage cooking under a sky the color of old bruises. Palm trees drooped like tired showgirls after a long night. The city's decay was a subtle perfume, a mix of exhaust, uncollected garbage, and the faint, sweet smell of desperation. The heat presses down, a physical weight on my chest, in my lungs. It's not just weather, it's the city's breath, hot and rank with exhaust fumes, and the sweat of too many bodies crammed too close, dreaming of cool breezes and cleaner lives. I feel it seeping into my pores, this slow bake, this constant simmering reminder that everything here is either burning up or rotting from the inside out. A pressure cooker reality where the lid is rattling and ready to blow. My skull is a drum, each pulse a hammer blow echoing the city's relentless, grinding rhythm. A miserable symphony conducted by a sun that doesn't care who it burns. I want a drink, not to quench thirst, but to drown the noise, to sink beneath the surface of this too bright, too loud, too damn hot reality, to find a moment's peace in the amber depths of a bottle that asks no questions and offers no sermons. A fat blue bottle fly, drunk on the heat and the lingering scent of whatever had died in the wastebasket, buzzed a lazy, suicidal circle around the single bare bulb hanging from a frayed cord. It gave up mid-flight, a tiny kamikaze, and landed with a soft thud on the windowsill, joining the other casualties of summer in the city. My kind of town, I thought, full of things that started with a buzz and ended with a splat. The telephone, a black Bakelite relic, sat there silent as a stone, like a paid mourner at a funeral nobody bothered to attend. I wasn't expecting calls. Work was a rumor, a story other people told. Something that happened in brighter offices with cleaner windows and secretaries who didn't look like they lost a fight with a bottle of cheap gin. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling. It looked like a map of a country I never wanted to visit, probably full of bad roads and worse coffee. The fat blue bottle fly hadn't moved from the sill. I watched it, a tiny black punctuation mark at the end of a long, hot sentence. Giving up looked easy right about then, just letting the sun bake you dry until you didn't buzz anymore. The silence in the room was thick, heavy, like old velvet, undisturbed by anything but the throb in my head. Then the knock came, soft, hesitant, a sound that didn't belong here. Not the sharp rap of the law, not the impatient drum of a bill collector. This was different. "It's open," I grunted, not bothering to move. The hinges creaked like an old man's knees. She stood in the doorway, a dark shape against the brighter gloom of the hallway, small and neat, a sparrow in a city of hawks. Her dress was dark, simple, and looked like it had been ironed with care. She clutched a worn black handbag to her chest as if it held the last decent thing in the world. Her eyes were too big and too old for her face, dark and deep, and they fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. She looked as out of place in my office as a prayer book in a Tijuana whorehouse, or a fresh flower in a junkyard. "Mr. Ransom," she asked. Her voice was low, a little unsteady, but it had a clear, bell-like quality at the end of the name, like a tiny chime in a dusty room. "Jack Ransom?" she asked, her voice low and unsure. I pushed myself up in the chair, wincing as my spine complained. "Depends who's asking," I said. My voice was rough, like gravel rolling downhill. and what they're selling. If it's salvation, I'm overstocked. The landlord's already threatened to evict me for non-payment of dues to the Celestial Choir. She flinched just a little at the cynicism. It was a familiar reaction. Most people did. My name is Maria Elena. Maria Elena Vargas. She stepped into the room, tentative, as if the floorboards might give way beneath her slight weight. The scent that came with her was faint, clean, like soap and maybe beeswax candles, the kind they burn in churches where the plaster saints have seen too much human misery and still manage a beatific smile. It was a smell that didn't belong in this office, with its stale tobacco and cheap whiskey ghosts. My brother Miguel, she said, her voice trembling a little now, the bell tone wavering. He's gone. He's disappeared. She swallowed, and her gaze dropped to the worn handbag she was still clutching. Her eyes, God, those eyes. Their dark pools reflecting a kind of light I haven't seen in years. A raw, unshielded belief that makes my gut clench like a fist. It's like staring into the sun after too long in a dark room. It hurts, physically hurts, to look at something so untainted. This isn't just a woman with a problem. It's a whole damn cathedral of sorrow and hope walking into my $10 a day tomb, bringing with her the scent of incense and the weight of unanswered prayers, and the way she says her brother's name when she finally gets to it, like a sacred word, a last fragile piece of stained glass. It digs under my skin, stirring up ghosts I thought I'd buried deep enough. Ghosts with faces I try to forget every time I close my eyes. I think he's been taken by this man, this Prophet Elijah, she choked. The name came out like something unclean, something she was afraid to touch with her tongue. Prophet Elijah. The name rang a faint, tinny bell in the back of my mind, lost in the general clang and clatter of the city's charlatans. Another one. This town grew them like mushrooms in a damp cellar, each one promising heaven, delivering mostly hot air and empty pockets. They preyed on the lost, the lonely, the desperate. People like this woman and probably her brother. She fumbled in her purse, her small hands shaking. She pulled out a photograph, the edges softened and creased from handling. She held it out to me. I took it. It was a cheap, faded snapshot. A young kid, maybe 16, 17, with a shock of dark hair falling over his forehead and a wide, slightly goofy grin. He wore a clean white shirt and stood awkwardly, one hand in his pocket, the other loosely at his side. He had his sister's eyes, dark and serious even when he was smiling, the kind of face that hadn't learned to lie yet, hadn't learned the city's hard angles, the kind of face that was easy prey. Please, he's a good boy, Mr. Ransom, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. He wouldn't just leave, not without a word. Her gaze pleaded with me, asking me to believe, to understand. He started going to this temple, the temple of the final radiance, Prophet Elijah's place. At first it was just something to do. He was lonely, but then he changed. He talked about light and purification. Her voice faltered. He gave all his money to them, everything he had. Then came her money. She reached into the purse again, this time pulling out a small crumpled wad of bills. Not much, maybe $50, $60. Looked like rent money, grocery money, maybe her last damn dime. She smoothed the bills out on the corner of my desk, her fingers trembling. The worn green of the currency seemed to soak up the grimy light of the office, looking even sadder and more pathetic. It's all I have, she whispered, her eyes fixed on the money, then lifting to mine, full of a desperate hope that made my stomach turn. But I can get more. I work. I clean houses. I can pay you. Please, Mr. Ransom, you have to find him. You have to bring him back. I looked from the money to the photograph, then to her face. The kid in the picture was smiling, innocent. The woman in front of me was on the edge of breaking. It was a story I'd heard before, in different voices, with different names, but the melody was always the same. Loss, fear, and a plea for help from a world that usually just shrugged and looked the other way. Lady, I said, my voice softer than I intended, but still carrying the rasp of too many cigarettes and too much bad news. I find things. Lost dogs, stray husbands, sometimes a stolen necklace if the price is right. I don't do miracles, and I don't usually tangle with God botherers. They tend to have lawyers thicker than flies on a week-old corpse, and followers who get mean if you question their shepherd. I pushed the money gently back towards her. This prophet Elijah, these cults, they're complicated, dangerous. This isn't enough to cover the aspirin I'd need just thinking about it. Her face fell, the fragile hope dimming, but she didn't pick up the money. Her chin lifted a fraction. He's just a boy, Mr. Ransom. My brother. He's lost. He's not himself. They've done something to his mind. I know it. Her voice, though quiet, had that bell-like clarity again, a stubborn refusal to break. Please, there is no one else I can go to. The police, they said he is an adult. They said he can go where he pleases. Her lip trembled. They did not listen. I leaned back in my chair, the springs groaning in protest. The heat seemed to press in closer. I looked at the kid in the photo again. He had his sister's eyes. Too many lost kids in this city, swallowed by the shadows, chewed up by the bright, false lights. The money wouldn't cover my bar tab for a slow week. It wouldn't even buy a decent bottle of rye. But there was something in her gaze, a stubborn fire under all that quiet devotion. Or maybe it was the kid. Or maybe it was just that I was tired of saying no, tired of the taste of my own cynicism. Damn it. There's a hook in this. And it's not just the chump change she's offering, not just the sad story. It's the echo, a whisper from a long time ago, a different face, a different kind of loss, a different kind of plea I didn't answer right. That same helpless look, that same desperate faith shining out of eyes that had seen too much darkness already, and the guilt still sharp enough to draw blood after all these years, a dull ache that flares up when I least expect it. I feel the old familiar pull, the one that tells me I'm about to do something stupid, something that'll cost more than the few bucks she's offering, something that will drag me down into the muck again. It's the pull of the abyss, dressed up in a cheap cotton dress and smelling of desperate faith in beeswax, and for some godforsaken reason, I'm leaning into it. The photograph felt warm in my hand, the edges soft from her touch, from her worry. It was more than paper. It was a life, a possibility, a small flickering candle in a very large, very dark room. I let out a long breath. The air in the office tasted like defeat, but it wasn't hers this time. It was mine. All right, I said, rubbing my jaw. It felt like sandpaper. My reflection in the dusty glass of a framed, forgotten license on the wall showed a man who looked like he'd been sleeping in his clothes for a week, which wasn't far from the truth. No promises, understand? These people, these prophets, they're good at making folks disappear, especially when the folks want to be disappeared. But I'll ask around. I'll see what I can find. I looked at the money. 50 a day plus expenses, and I want half of this up front. Even as I said it, I knew I wouldn't take much more of her money, no matter how long this took. Some holes you just didn't dig any deeper. Her face crumpled, then smoothed out into a watery smile. Relief. It was a fragile thing, easily broken, but for a moment, it lit up her face like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. Oh, thank you, Mr. Ransom, she breathed, her hand flying to her chest. Gracias a Dios. Thank you. She pushed the crumpled bills towards me again, and this time I took 25, leaving the rest. It felt like too much, and not nearly enough, all at the same time. I wrote out a receipt on a dog-eared pad, my name and the address of this mausoleum I called an office. My handwriting looked like a spider had died in an inkwell. As she gathered herself to leave, she reached into her purse again. This time, she pulled out a string of cheap glass prayer beads. They were a luminous blue like a summer sky you only saw in postcards from places where the air was clean. Small, round, probably cost a dime a dozen. She held them out to me, her expression earnest, almost solemn. For protection, Mr. Ransom, she said, pressing them into my hand. Her fingers were cool and surprisingly strong. May God watch over you while you search for Miguel. May his light guide your steps. I looked down at the beads. They lay cool and smooth in my palm. Protection? God was usually looking the other way when I was around. Or maybe he just didn't like my brand of company, preferring to keep his distance. I almost laughed, a harsh, barking sound, but it caught in my throat, tangled up with the bourbon fumes and the sudden, unexpected weight of those glass beads. They felt surprisingly heavy, like small, polished stones from a riverbed where someone had drowned. Each one a tiny, solidified prayer. Thank you, I said, the words tasting like rust and old regrets. I wasn't sure what else to say. I slipped the beads into my jacket pocket. They clinked softly against the Zippo lighter that bore initials that weren't mine. LR, another ghost. My pocket suddenly felt crowded. Maria Elena gave me a small, grateful nod. I will pray for you, Mr. Ransom, and for Miguel. She hesitated for a moment, as if there was more she wanted to say, more sorrow or hope she wanted to unload. But then she just turned and walked out, as quietly as she came. The door clicked shut behind her, a soft final sound. The office seemed emptier, hotter, now that she was gone. The silence hummed a different tune. Not just boredom anymore, but the low, insistent thrum of trouble starting up its engine, getting ready to roll. I picked up the faded photograph of the kid, Miguel. He was still smiling that goofy, innocent smile. He didn't know what kind of town this was, what kind of shadows could swallow a boy whole. Maybe I'd be the one to tell him, if I could find him, if he was still around to be told. I leaned back, the chair groaning again. The heat was a blanket, smothering. I pulled the glass beads from my pocket. They caught the dim light, glowing faintly. Protection. Right. I needed more than a string of 10-cent beads to navigate the sewers this prophet Elijah likely called a temple. But I kept them in my hand anyway, rolling them between my thumb and forefinger. They were smooth and cool, and for a moment they almost felt like something real in a city built on illusions and bad dreams. The bluebottle fly on the windowsill hadn't moved. Smart fly. Sometimes staying dead was the wisest move in this town, and I had a sinking feeling in my chest that this case was going to make me wish I'd taken its advice.